Tonight, we turn our attention to sovereign wealth funds, how they can drive economic stability, enhance transparency, and serve as a safeguard against corruption. Namibia's Welwitschia Fund is still in its early stages, and there's a lot to learn from international models like Norway's government pension fund Global. How do we ensure this fund serves its intended purpose and avoids the pitfalls seen in other countries? Joining me to unpack these complexities is the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research, Mr. Graham Hopwood. Graham, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Now, sovereign wealth funds, Graham, have often been vulnerable to political interference and mismanagement. How can Namibia ensure the Welwitschia Fund remains independent and corruption-free?
Well, we need to replicate a lot of what Norway has done, and it's very good that Namibia is benchmarking the Welwitschia Fund against the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. I don't think not just in terms of financial returns, but in the way that it's governed, the fiscal rules and the rules that are applied in terms of transparency. So what we need to see is a bit more of that in Namibia. But if we can move in the direction of Norway, it means that we'll have independent oversight, we'll have parliamentary oversight, there'll be regular reports going to Parliament and possible discussion by parliamentary committees, reports to the public, and a whole load of information that is made available. And that seems to have been what's protected the Norwegian fund from any serious claims of corruption or anything going wrong in terms of its governance. And just to underline with the Norwegian example that it is the most successful sovereign wealth fund in the world, and there are 90 of them in total now. It's now standing at 1.9 trillion US dollars, which is an amazing figure. It's been running since the mid-1990s, of course, so it's had a long time to build that up. But also importantly for us, it has the best ethical record. It has the best record on transparency and accountability in the world. So we are at the early stage, as you mentioned. So we, at this point, and before we've actually introduced our legislation on our sovereign wealth fund, can learn an awful amount from Namibia so that we get it right. And the point of getting it right is that the people of Namibia at the end are the beneficiaries. The people now, but also the future generations, because a sovereign wealth fund is partly about creating a fund that can deal with any emergencies in our economy, but more so, I think, about saving money for future generations from finite natural resources. And obviously, we hope that our oil and gas will come on stream in the next 5 or 6 years, but it is finite. It will run out at some point, but we still need to make sure that Namibia has money in the country to look after our citizens going forward into the next generation. So that's the idea and the importance of the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Looking at the Norwegian model, what key strategies could we adapt to strengthen accountability and transparency in our own sovereign wealth fund?
Well, they put an awful lot of effort into monitoring their wealth fund. So the gentleman from Norway who was speaking to us this morning, Kjell Dorholm, he's an advisor on corruption for the fund, was basically his role is to make sure that their investments, where they put their money in various stocks and companies around the world, is free of corruption. So they have a very clear policy that they don't invest money in companies with track records of corruption or human rights abuses or poor records on the environment. So they have very clear benchmarks on that. So that's one side of protecting the sovereign wealth fund, is to make sure the investments and the investment policy that is used by the sovereign wealth fund is very clear and avoids any questionable companies. They are completely investing in listed companies, so companies that are on stock exchanges, usually where there are much stronger rules about companies, but also where companies are much more aware of the damage that can be done by reputational knocks to them. So, if the Norwegian company, Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund says that this company is not up to scratch and we're not going to invest in it, and they do that publicly in Norway, then it's a very serious reputational setback for a company. So that's part of it. But the other part, which I think we can learn at the moment, because our sovereign wealth fund is still limited. I think the governor of the bank, Mr. Gawakab, last week, when the Gaingob, the late president's banknote was launched, said that our fund is currently at 460 million Namibian dollars, having basically been in existence for just over nearly 3 years, and has increased because of the markets and the way that the money has been invested. But obviously, it's still at a relatively low level, especially if you think that the Norwegian fund is over $1 trillion and going up towards $2 trillion US dollars. So the key part for us really is to make sure the fund is properly managed. And that means that the bank, together with the Ministry of Finance, are basically joint custodians of our fund at the moment, has very clear rules and regulations to operate to, and to make sure that the fund is properly managed. And a lot of that has to do with transparency. So if they're going to be releasing regular reports, they have very clear policies which are made public, as well as all the rules for the investments that are being made, then we'll be in a much stronger position to rule out any possible malpractice. And now some people might say, well, that maybe we're exaggerating the risks here, but the worst example in recent times is the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which was basically raided by the president and his cronies, and $4.5 billion US dollars was stolen out of that fund since 2020. The president of Malaysia was arrested. He's now an ex-president and he's now in jail. Won't be released until 2028. But that just shows that, when politicians and also other corrupt elements in a society might sense there's a huge amount of money in this particular pot, they become very tempted to raid it in different ways. And it has happened in certain countries. So we need to make sure that there's no possibility of that in Namibia.
I'm glad you touched on transparency there, because it's critical when it comes to public trust. So what mechanisms should be put in place to ensure that, Namibians have full visibility into how the Welwitschia Fund is not only managed, but also reported on?
Well, the Norwegian fund has this amazing website, which actually shows in real time the value of the fund. And you can see this amount in Norwegian kroner, usually going up in real time, and also then releasing a lot more detail about where the investments are made and how the fund is operated and the rules. As I mentioned, it's unfortunate, but perhaps not exceptional, that Namibia has a draft sovereign wealth fund bill that's actually been around since 2021, but hasn't yet reached Parliament. And one of the things that we can do to ensure that our fund is run properly is to get that to Parliament as soon, and hopefully after some serious consultation. So it's a very strong draft law and regulations as well that go with the law, and make sure they're in place so that going forward, as we get nearer to the point when we expect there will be more money being put into the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is basically 2029, 2030, 2031, whatever year we hope the oil will start to be pumped out of the ground under the sea, and that the fiscus, the Ministry of Finance, starts to receive large amounts in terms of royalties and taxes. So just a reminder that, I learned today actually that the Norwegians tax the oil companies at a rate of 78%. So that they get 78% of their profits going into the Norwegian government, and a lot of that into the fund, into the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So we'll also probably have a very high tax rate and royalty rate on oil companies that are producing. probably upwards of 70%. So we will, presuming and hoping that our oil comes on stream, have large amounts of money arriving in the government's coffers, and that has to be really well managed. And a key part of that is making sure the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which will receive a chunk of that money, is really well managed and is transparently done. And as I say, the media, civil society, Parliament, the Auditor General, probably other independent oversight bodies, Anti-Corruption Commission, and so on, are going to have very demanding but very clear roles that they're going to have to play as our Sovereign Wealth Fund develops and gets nearer to operating under an act passed by Parliament.
But civil society and independent watchdogs also play a crucial role in ensuring transparency. So how can they effectively oversee the Welwitschia Fund, to prevent corruption and resource mismanagement?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're concerned about is that civil society is still relatively small in Namibia. The civil society organizations are not big. None of them are. I mean, the IPPR is still quite a small institution. So we need to increase the capacity within civil society and also the knowledge base. So we're looking at possible training programs for civil society in the next couple of years to make sure they understand what a sovereign wealth fund is, how a well-managed sovereign wealth fund operates, and just how important it is for them to play a monitoring role in this. And then I think they can engage with the fund and make sure, using things like our access to information law, if the information is not instantly available, to make sure they have all the information they need to inform themselves and the communities they represent. So there's a lot that the civil society can be doing, but we need to also, improve our own performance and increase our capacity and our knowledge, not just on the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We've also talked a lot about the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which is another way of making sure that we get the best out of our minerals and our oil and gas, and to make sure even green hydrogen can be included in that, to make sure that these are operated in Namibia in the best interests of citizens as a whole. And there are huge tasks ahead of us because, so many things are happening at the same time: oil and gas, green hydrogen, what we call critical raw materials, lithium and so on, that are increasingly being mined in the west of the country. We really need to be on top of what's happening, monitoring what's happening. So we're going to have to do a lot. And so are the media, to be honest. All journalists need to be trained in these areas as well. One of the points that was made by the speaker this morning from Norway is that they work with civil society, but particularly investigative journalists, to be able to spot the risks, identify companies that might be risky to work with, and so on. So civil society and the media, in a country like Namibia, where we have a free press, where civil society can operate largely unrestrained, we need to really step up to the mantle here and play a full role.
Graham, just lastly, since Namibia is still laying the foundation to its sovereign wealth fund, what immediate steps would you advise could be taken to establish strong governance structures to prevent this mismanagement that we touched on, and also drawing inspiration from successful global models?
Well, I do think the Bank of Namibia can at the moment be a bit clearer about the rules they are operating under in terms of the Welwitschia Fund, and make it a lot more clearer what is going on. So that's the first step. And the second step would be to make sure the draft report comes to Parliament as soon as possible, that we can have the law in place. We'll have a lot more confidence that everything will be governed. It'll be very clear who the stakeholders are and the role of the Ministry of Finance, Public Enterprises, and all the. So we can do that now in the next few months this year, and then I think Parliament. We have a whole new coming in, so they also need to be trained on these kind of issues to make sure across different parties how a operate, what they can do to ensure it is being governed properly in the future. So there's a lot we can be getting on with in the short to medium term.
Graham Hopwood, it was a pleasure having you here with us. Thank you so much for your time this evening and joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Great. Thanks very much, Nina.